Now, so welcome, folks. My name is Corey Steglin. I'm the founder of the Lighthouse Project, where we host panels like this and podcasts that I do with Bex, who's on the call. So thank you. And basically, we talk about social justice-y themed issues or socially charged issues. A previous panel I've done was talking about gender and race and social work in the American South. And today we're talking about gender and sexuality in the American South. My panelists today are Evelyn Berry to the left of my screen anyways. I don't know what your screen looks like. And then Amberlyn Boiter to the right of my screen. Evelyn is from Aiken, South Carolina. Amberlyn is from Spartanburg, South Carolina. So still both living in very rural settings. And both of them are just incredibly good friends of mine. I'm so thankful for both of them. I love both of them so much. And just, again, so grateful that y'all have agreed to be on this panel today. So thank you for taking time out of your Saturday to talk about important stuff. I'm going to start this panel with the question, what is something you wish people would ask about your relationship with gender and sexuality that you feel simply isn't asked enough?
At first, I felt like this was a silly question the first time someone asked it. But it was, does your sexuality change in any way? And I would be interested to hear if Evelyn had, I don't know, a similar experience to me. But like I do identify as a lesbian, but I think as I have, I guess, uncorked the mental blocks that you put in place, being raised very conservatively, very fundamentalist, traditionalist, things like that. I am still sexually attracted and exclusively sexually attracted to women, but I think on the romantic spectrum, I think maybe I discovered that I can find some romantic attraction to people of the opposite gender, which is something that I guess I would have never entertained before. And so my instinct reaction to that question was always, well, no, I mean, I was born liking women and you can't change that. But I do think when we get to a point where we can, I guess, be willing to question a lot of those things, I think maybe we end up discovering some things about ourselves. Because I mean, once you go through gender transition, I mean, you have pretty much said, I'm going to question everything about my identity. And so I think in that latitude, giving myself some more latitude to work in thinking about who I am. I did discover that that maybe some aspects of my romantic attraction had always been maybe a little more flexible than I thought they were.
Thank you, Amberlyn. I've heard that from some other trans folks that I'm friends with or that I've known in my life. So it's interesting to see this unexpected thread, because I was surprised the first time a trans person vocalized their sexuality changing. Evelyn, what are your thoughts on Amberlyn's response and on the question itself, which, as a reminder, is what is something you wish people would ask about your relationship with gender and sexuality that you feel simply isn't asked enough?
Yeah, to respond to Amberlyn about sexuality changing. My sexuality has changed, but not necessarily like who I'm attracted to, but more like what I'm into. I'm not going to go into detail about what that is, but the way that I approach sex and intimacy is very different. And I think it's value neutral in a way. Like, I don't think the way I did it before was bad. But I realized I enjoy things that I was like, oh, yeah, this is great. But you know, before coming out as transgender, I was also out as queer and bisexual or pansexual, whichever the terms you use. And you know, when I'm really attracted to like queer people, so whoever is also queer or trans or gender variant in some way, that's who I'm attracted to and want to be intimate with. Identify as a slut, let's say, but you know, a very unambitious one. And yeah, that's kind of how things have changed for me. I've heard that a lot as well. The thing I wish people would ask more about, I guess, is joy. Like, I think this is something that trans people talk about amongst themselves, but it's something when I talk, you know, to cis friends who are very well-meaning, you know, it's just about how did your trauma lead to this decision? Which, you know, I definitely deal with a lot of dysphoria, and trans people in general and queer people in general deal with a lot of regret and abuse, both interpersonally and also socially. But I think it's really important to fight all those things, but I also want to make sure that people know that there's tremendous joy, because if you don't know that, then it is really scary to begin the process of transitioning or to come out publicly as queer, because all that you see is stories in which people are dying, in which people are suffering. And those are not the only stories that we're living. I think that even in an era where things feel really miserable and really hard right now, I am happy to be able to live through that era as myself and without compromise.
Thank you so much for uplifting queer joy and trans joy, because you're right, it is hugely washed over with all of the trauma and everything, not just media, but like in personal narratives as well. And it can be really easy to get bogged down in that negative. That actually is a really good segue into my next question, which is, what are some of the greatest moments of joy that have come from your transition? Alternatively, you can answer a similar question of, can you describe your first instance of gender euphoria? Which, for folks who don't know what the term gender euphoria means, who are on this call, gender euphoria typically means the first moment where, or not the first moment, but a moment of joy related to your gender presentation and gender identity matching how you feel inside. And Evelyn, Amberlyn, please add on to that if you'd like to.
Go ahead, Evelyn.
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So this is a huge cliche, but I get a lot of joy from presenting very femme, wearing skirts and dresses and having very long hair. And, you know, I'm very aware that's not like all women don't do those things. But for me, it is something I really like, to be incredibly femme and kind of lean into that kind of hyper feminine presentation, even though right now I'm not wearing makeup. I didn't have time to put on makeup, I'm sorry. But I do love it. I really do love it. And I remember, you know, I had been growing out my hair for like 2 years for no reason, just for funsies. And I remember my partner was like, oh, you can put it up in a bun, and like put it up in a bun for the first time. And I remember looking at myself and realizing how I looked and how much I liked that, and how, I don't know, I just was really happy about that. And that was like a huge thing. I think there was like that moment where I was like, oh shit, I'm trans. So there was also a bit of like grief in it as well. There was a joy, but I was also incredibly afraid of what that meant, which I realized, you know, to a certain degree was unfair of past me to think about future me. But yeah, I don't know. It did also make me very happy. And I was like, oh wow, feelings. Oh yeah. So anyways.
Yeah, my whole experience, we talk a lot about dysphoria driving us to transition. And I certainly had periods of that in my past and in my childhood and things like that. I didn't know what it was. I just know that it was some feeling that little nerdy logical me boxed up and stashed away somewhere. But it was the euphoria that really pushed me over the edge into realizing, oh wow, this is, I didn't know that the happiness scale went this high. And the things that bring me joy are really simple things these days. Just recognizing the person that I see in the mirror. It goes such a long way to bringing those unbelievable periods of joy. And if we want to talk about early moments of gender euphoria, and it's hard for me to even talk about this, but I had, from probably 12, 13 years old, all the way to the day I came out, whether it was my mom's closet or my wife's closet, I would sneak into those closets and try on clothes and things and just be like, you know, I had a beard and everything back then. I was just like, that's gross, that's terrible, I'll never make a pretty woman, blah, blah, blah. And after I came out to my wife and she was on board with me, and the first time that I did hair and makeup and I put on a dress and I stood there in the mirror, and I just started uncontrollably bawling, and I bet I cried for 10 or 15 minutes, just absolute sobbing, and it was all tears of joy, because I felt like I'd been driving this. It is something I've said before, but I feel like I had been driving this video game character around for 30 years. And for the first time I saw me, and it was just, yeah. So yeah, that would be my first instance of joy and gender euphoria.
Which
before
I
I
think
get, yeah.
is a beautiful moment of joy and euphoria. Yeah, like I was almost tearing up listening to you. So thank you so much for sharing. You said the euphoria helped push you through your transition. Were there any other factors for either of you or both of you that you feel kept you going even when it was difficult?
For me, having a supportive partner really pushed me through it. I know that not all, or even in a lot of cases, very few trans people have a partner behind them through that process. So I count myself really lucky. And I think also when you've experienced, and again, this is just my experience, but when I experienced the other end of the happiness scale that I didn't have access to before. It was at that point that I definitely realized, you take this away from me, that's going to kill me. And I would rather live as an out trans woman than die as a closeted one.
So, one thing to know, I guess, is before I came out as a trans woman, I was out as non-binary for many years. And, something to understand is that's not always the way. There's not like a non-binary to binary trans pipeline. And in some ways, I still identify as non-binary. So it's complicated, but I started kind of going through that exploration around the time I was 21. I remember I had just gone through a breakup I'd been with someone for many, many years. And so it was like, I was kind of exploring sexually with men for the first time in my life. I was growing out my hair. I had really long hair at that time. I looked more like a beetle than I do now, but I'd also wear skirts. Like I had a, beard as well, a lot of, body hair. But I also kind of dressed in a very gender non-conforming way. And one of the reasons I was so comfortable doing that when I was 21 is that I randomly was like looking for a place to stay, and a friend of a friend of a friend had said, "Hey, we have a super cheap apartment, come move in." And it was in this house that was kind of notoriously the apartment where all of the women's rugby team lived. Absolutely crazy, chaotic place to live. A lot of wild parties. But I was surrounded by these very queer women, some of who were very butch, some of who were very femme. And being around them was so wonderful because they really made me feel safe. And we would throw parties at our house. And, it was kind of this thing of, well, I'll wear a skirt at this house party where it's like our space and around queer people who get it, who are fine with it. Or if we're going out to a bar, I was going with these, lesbians who were very strong and they were like, we'll take care of you. We will beat up anyone who messes with you. So I thought that was great. I think that, that was kind of the point where there were some things I did that I thought of as like, oh, this is just a quirky thing I do. Oh, I just wear skirts sometimes. I like wearing glitter. I like doing all this different stuff that's a little unmasculine, non-masculine. That was kind of the first time I really connected those actions and movements with gender and came out as non-binary and started exclusively using they, them pronouns. And then I moved to Aiken, which is my hometown, and originally for a year, said I'm gonna go get a job for a year, save up money, and then I'm gonna go elsewhere, gonna like move out of the country, and that never happened. I still live here. And that was really hard for a long time. I kind of felt like moving back to Aiken was crawling back into the closet. And so I was in a town that's fairly rural. There really is no LGBT community here. I worked in a very conservative, misogynist workplace. And I had to wear a button-up shirt and tie every day, and things changed really fast. I cut my hair, and yeah, I was no longer a little hippie. I was working for the government, and it wasn't until the pandemic. I didn't work from home per se, but I did get to work alone. So basically, everyone in my workplace, I worked at an archives, went home to work from home, and I was the one person left behind who had to like answer the phone. So it was a very strange time in March and April and May in particular, because everyone was like, I'm just sitting at home drinking wine, and I was at work, but also there was no one to like supervise me or look at what I was doing. And I was also just like not doing anything with anyone. So I started dressing differently. I'd literally just show up in a skirt or something and, no one's going to see me. I started to grow out my hair again because I wasn't so worried about being professional. And I started to kind of reconnect with that more feminine side of me. And like Amberlyn, I had a partner who really encouraged and helped me. They helped me feel incredibly comfortable with who I was and who I could be. And they also, they're non-binary and knew plenty of makeup tricks. They taught me how to do eyeliner. They taught me how to take care of my hair. They taught me about, moisturizing my face. Also helping me find like clothes that fit my body and looked good. And they also they made me feel like it was possible to transition and to make this huge decision, and that if I made this decision, no matter what happened, I would not be alone.
What was that like for you when you realized that like transitioning was an option? Because it floored me, like thinking like there is no way that this will ever happen in my life, to all of a sudden going, yeah, we're doing this.
Yeah, it's so weird because I had transgender friends in college and who I still kept in touch with via like Facebook and Twitter and stuff. And so I knew it was possible, like I knew that it was possible for other people, but I felt like I was too old. And I felt that I was too fat. I remember talking to my partner. I remember just feeling very despondent and literally saying like, well, I can't transition now because I'm going to be an ugly woman. And I didn't want to be that. I just felt so awful. And eventually what kind of happened was, I think too, I realized it's so terrible. I was like, you're looking at these examples of trans people who are usually put up on given a platform, and they're young, they're 18 to 20 years old. And some of them are saying things like, well, I'm 21 years old and, it's just too late for me to transition. And, I was like, well, okay. And, they're white and they're thin, and it's so much more rare to see overweight trans women. It's so much more rare to see Black trans women, and it's so much rare to see disabled trans women or elderly trans women given an actual platform to share their experience. And so it was really discouraging, almost more than encouraging, until I started to really start to dismantle those kind of, ideas in my own head of thinking, well, am I for fat liberation? Then why, being a fat woman is a great thing. Fat women are really sexy, and it's not a sin, and it's not shameful. And I would love to be a fat woman, which is now what I am. So I was very thankful for that. And what's also been really nice is meeting a lot more older trans women who are much older than I, who started transitioning much later than I did. And also just trans women who were fat was really cool. I didn't know that existed. And now I know a lot of fat trans women who are all really cool. And I'm like very happy to be a part of that. Yeah, it's cool. I don't know. It makes me very happy.
Thank you, both of you. Thank you, Amberlyn, for asking the question, and Evelyn for providing such an eloquent answer. We do look like we have a question from Ada. Go ahead.
Hi, I was just going to ask, do you think that we're probably harder on ourselves just because, like, not just being trans, but like with other body image issues? Like, I'm consistently worried about my weight, and I'm not sure if that's just a woman thing or if it's because of the body dysmorphia from being transgender.
I think, if Evelyn, if you don't mind me speaking, my personal experience, so one of the things that I did as part of my transition was I had an orchiectomy, which is one of the gender affirming procedures that are kind of like a pit stop on the way to full GRS for those who don't know. And in order to do that, I had to get under a certain BMI. So over the course of 8 months, I guess it was, I lost about 80 or 90 pounds. And for the most part, I've maintained that. And so I do get in these spaces where if I know that I've put on 5 or 10 pounds because it's been, well, for example, Pride Week, it's down at Park Circle Pride, you're at a pub guzzling beer and eating fried food practically every night. I think what my brain does is it equates you were fatter when you were a man, and therefore gaining weight is detransitioning. That is what my brain does. I can't speak for the experience of cis women, and I can't speak for the experience of other trans women, but that's why I am kind of hard on myself in particular about weight. So I do resonate with what you're saying, Ada.
Yeah, I'll just say that, this is not my idea or a new idea, but there's, particular forms of trans misogyny that create expectations for trans women that are no longer expected for cis women. So it's interesting. So, when you think of people imposing the kind of ideals of, okay, what should a woman be onto cis women, and they're all terrible things, and you must be skinny, you must be this attractive, it's all kind of impossible things. And so often those same incredibly like misogynistic expectations of what a woman should be, she should be thin but with big hips to bear children, and she should be this and she should be that, are then amplified onto trans women because they have to quote unquote prove that they are feminine. They have to prove that they are women. And if they are not hyper feminine, if they are not really leaning into it, then sometimes it's seen as kind of unreal, or they're not trying hard enough. It's like, well, why aren't you doing X? Like, you're obviously not trying hard enough. Do you really deserve to be called a woman if you're not trying hard enough? And that's a really hard thing. And of course that gets internalized. I mean, I was talking to my friend the other day, this is embarrassing, but I was literally like incredibly dysphoric about the fact that I have arm hair. And I was like, I just keep shaving my arms and it keeps growing back. And they were looking at me like, do you think women don't have arm hair? And I was like, yeah, you're right, I'm being really silly. Women have arm hair. Like, a lot of women have arm hair. But like, I'm letting this kind of very misogynistic expectation become internalized in a way that is terrible. And yeah, it's something I'm struggling through a lot, and I don't think it's something I'm going to get over for a very long time. But I'm working on it.
I don't think it's something the system is designed to encourage you to get over very quickly. I think there are a lot of really negative expectations across the board, but especially, you're correct, towards trans women. I am not a trans woman. I'm a non-binary person. But I've seen the expectations of hyperfemininity that are imposed upon trans women that are not imposed upon cis women. I have a question prompted by Evelyn's response, but I thought I saw another audience hand. Do we have Other audience questions before I jump into mine? No? Okay. Um, so I want to talk, and this is not a fun topic, sorry. I want to talk about the notion of cis passing and what that means to y'all and how that has impacted your relationship with your transition. For those unfamiliar with that term, cis passing refers to the ability to pass as cis, basically meaning that you look like a woman, that you don't look like a trans woman, that you're not clockable as such. And it, in my opinion, is a really negative phenomenon for several reasons. It puts people who do not pass in this box of somehow inferior to people who do pass. It can be legitimately a safety concern if you don't pass, because if you don't pass as cis and you are identifiably trans, if someone has an issue with transness, and in the current climate, there are a lot of people who have issues with transness, it can literally be life-threatening. And it does set these not normal, unhealthy expectations on trans folk specifically that, again, are not set for cis folk. So after that explanation, what does cis passing conjure up for y'all, and how does it impact your relationship with your gender?
Complicated, extremely complicated. I will first say that I haven't completely untangled this issue yet in my own heart and my own brain, because I have a lot of conflicting ideas as well as a lot of conflicting feelings. Sometimes those ideas and feelings don't line up. So I'll first say, often there is a hierarchy that is imposed on trans women and among trans people in general based on your ability to pass and assimilate into culture. And I think that for a lot of people throughout history, that has been a survival technique. Recently, I saw a really interesting documentary. It's about to come out, I think, in a couple of months, but I got a little sneak peek, which is quite cool. It's called Framing Agnes, which it's about these women who went to the gender clinic in the 1950s at UCLA. And something that was so interesting about it was a lot of these women, the idea was once you got GRS, once you got the surgeries, once you got to a certain level of your transition, you would then fade into society. You would then disappear, and this was kind of seen as a success story. And in a lot of ways it was. It meant that you could marry. It meant that you could live as a woman and not have to, a lot of these women had to be sex workers. A lot of these women were living in very dangerous situations. So when I say what I'm about to say, I want to make sure that I don't begrudge anyone their want to not be seen visibly, because it is dangerous in a lot of ways to be seen visibly as trans. On the other hand, I don't think anyone passes. I think passing is a really flawed concept, because we have to then make these really difficult and unfair distinctions on what it means to be a woman. What does it mean to look like a woman or pass as a woman? This is a common issue once you start to describe a woman. Well, I can tell because she has facial hair. Well, I know a lot of cis women with facial hair, especially women with PCOS. I know a lot of women with a lot of body hair. I know a lot of women, cis women who, if a transphobe were to see them, they would clock them as a trans woman. And in fact, we've seen this happen with transphobic people encountering people in bathrooms. It happened to someone I knew recently who, has very short hair, is very androgynous, and was accosted in their gym locker room while they were using the toilet. Someone started banging on the door and accusing them of being a man coming into the toilet, and it turned into a whole kerfuffle. So that's kind of the thing too, and it's really harmful to, I think, internalize these things. Like, in some ways, it's so strange because I live in a place where I'm very aware that on a ideological level, the people I come into contact with, some of the people I do work with or collaborate with via a professional environment, are ideologically against me existing. But at the same time, I'm like, well, surely you notice that I am trans. Like, surely you hear my voice and you see my face and you see my body and you clock me. And I am always kind of living in a bit of a fear of that. On the other hand, I didn't have people in my life who were trans for the longest time until I was like out of high school, out of Aiken. And I work in education. So I work as a museum educator. I work in a museum. I constantly see families. I see people of all backgrounds from all across the country, really from around the world. And they don't, I've literally had people tell me, they're like, I didn't expect to find someone like you in Aiken, South Carolina. And I'm like, well, yeah, well, we're here too. We're everywhere and we're part of your community. And so at this point, whatever passing means, I don't know. It doesn't really matter how much I look or don't look like a woman. I don't really care anymore. I just do it kind of for myself. But also, if someone were to ask me, are you trans? I never want to lie. And I know that's not the case for everyone. But for me, I feel very proud to be able to be that person who, when I go into a classroom, I am the trans educator. I'm not teaching about transgender issues. I'm teaching science. Like, that's what I teach, STEM issues. Like, we talk about space exploration and we talk about the Cold War history and things like that. But I really like, I like that I'm visible in some ways. It can feel really scary, especially online. Like I do online stuff on like TikTok or Twitter, and I've gotten to the point where people I'm getting enough of a following that people are very mean to me, who are complete strangers, which is a good sign to know that my work is going places. But yeah, that's also uncomfortable in some ways. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't care what this person who is hateful thinks of me. Why would I value that person's opinion? Anyways, those are my rambling thoughts about passing. I'm sure I'll have much more congealed thoughts in the future, in 5 to 10 to 15 years from now.
Yeah, my experience is actually remarkably similar to yours, Evelyn. When I started this out, I think I had a list of priorities because I'm a project manager for a living. So I was just like, well, this is another project. I'm just going to manage my body until it's how I want it. And in the beginning, my list of priorities was to work on facial and body hair, and work on legal stuff, of course. But at the first surgery that I really had on the list was facial feminization surgery, with bottom surgery being much further down the list of priorities. And that was because I think in the early stages and also in the very early stages of transition, you don't have some of the, there are facial changes that estrogen and HRT it does to your face. Fat moves around, and you do look a little different. I can go back and look at pictures very early in my HRT and much later in my HRT, and there are definite changes in my face. But I think as I was getting into my transition, I started to at least accept and appreciate the face that I saw in the mirror, despite, that you occasionally do things like, oh, well, you've got a brow ridge. Oh, your nose is huge. Oh, this and that. So I think the more time I have spent in public view and being visible as a trans woman, and realizing that being clocked does not necessarily mean that I'm going to be attacked, has allowed me to kind of kick FFS down the list a little bit, to the point where I'm even questioning if I ever want it, because like Evelyn was saying, do I really care that someone knows that I'm a trans woman? And I think the point that I'm getting to is, well, if as long as they respect me as a woman, I don't really care if they know that I'm trans. I can certainly understand the desire to be cis passing because you are concerned about safety. I can certainly understand grieving not getting to go through the proper puberty the first time around, and grieving that you didn't have that opportunity, and wanting to pass for those reasons. But as far as getting hung up on whether or not you pass, I agree with everything that's been said so far, in that can ultimately be a dangerous part of not just trans culture, but mainstream culture, because like Evelyn has said, there are people out there that have clocked Mark Zuckerberg as a trans person, because they have all of these crazy ideas of like these angles and these skull measurements and everything else mean that someone is cis or trans. And it's really harmful on both sides. So I agree. I'm reaching a point in my transition, and this may absolutely change later down the road, but I'm reaching a point in my transition where I don't really care if you know that I'm trans. The only thing that I care about is that you're respectful to me.
I think respect is the bare minimum to ask. And I super appreciate both of your stances, because I agree. I think the notion of cis passing is frankly bullshit and toxic. So thank you for both uplifting visibility. I'm gonna ask, I think, 3 more questions, unless your
Can I
brilliant
say more about
response.
that? I got pissed off about something, and I'm like, I have more to say.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, this
Go
is
ahead.
one thing I'll say about passing. It's also an incredibly like discriminatory thing to demand that trans people pass, because a lot of things that you need to pass are expensive. Like you need health insurance for a lot of people to get onto hormones. There are some very affordable options, which is great. But still, I know trans women who struggle to make those payments. It's like, for me, I'm like, oh, it's $45 a month. That's great. $45 a month is a lot of money to some people. I also have been getting laser hair removal. That's a huge privilege. I have a really nice, cushy little job. It's not like I'm making a living wage, but I'm now able to afford laser hair removal. And that is intensely helpful for my dysphoria, for my existing in the world. It just makes life incredibly easier. And you have to think about the different kinds of, who can afford FFS? If you're a trans man, who can afford top surgery? Different people have different size breasts. That's expensive. It's really expensive. And so, I think that's also something to kind of consider, is that a lot of these kind of concepts of passing are based around incredibly imperialist and kind of patriarchal modes of control that are designed to control people, and that sucks. And yeah, I don't know. I think about that all the time. I don't want to get too caught up with it, because I don't want to ever tell anyone else what it means to be trans, whether they need to be on hormones or whether they need to present in a certain way. I just, I'm not interested in people judging me, and so I don't want to judge anyone else either. And yeah.
Thank you for bringing up explicitly the very classist nature of passing. And I wanted to uplift something Amberlyn posted in the chat for folks who maybe don't have access to the chat. Feminine facial, hang on, what is it? What does FFS stand for one more time? Sorry.
Facial feminization surgery.
Thank you. Thank you. She's seen feminine facial, oh my God. Feminine.
Facial feminization surgery.
Good Lord. She's seen facial feminization surgery estimates greater than 70,000, which that is greater than what I make in 2 years. So there is definitely a lot of privilege inherent to things that are expected of passing. I have a couple more questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience to see if they have anything to add or anything. First, I'm going to try to combine some of these, actually, in the sake of time. So you have both talked about being visible and visibility as a concept. What does visibility mean for you specifically in the rural and religious American South where y'all both live? And then similarly, what influence, if any, do you feel the rural and religious American South has had on your relationship with gender and sexuality?
I think why I want to be visible, and I hope that so many others are, is for safety. I think the only way that we're going to be able to better guarantee safety without changing everyone's minds and opinions about trans people is to be visible in numbers where they say, well, there's not really a lot we can do about it. Because I do feel like that's what's happened, with same-sex couples and everything else, is it just became so boringly normal to see that people gave up caring so much about it. So I think from my perspective, that's the importance of visibility. As far as how the rural and religious South impacted my, I guess, association with my gender identity and sexuality and everything, the short answer is it stunted it for 3 decades. But it's also not quite that simple, because had I not presented as a straight white conservative evangelical Christian man for so long of my life, I wouldn't have met my wife. We wouldn't have adopted our daughter. And so while there's a bitterness there of, you mean I could have been that bitchy, skanky little teenage girl and I didn't get the chance to. There's some bitterness there around that, but at the same time, those circumstances contributed to the person who's sitting here now. And I don't know that I can guarantee that my life would have been better had I transitioned before. I think I would have been more comfortable with myself. But a lot of the circumstances of my life would be different. And I know that it's kind of an unpopular statement to say, because I know that could be flipped to justify prohibiting, teenagers transitioning and things like that. And that's certainly not what I'm trying to get at. But I am trying to bring attention to the fact that there's a lot of nuance in everything in life, and especially in gender transition. It's extraordinarily painful that I didn't get to transition earlier, but at the same time, the circumstances of my life wouldn't be the same if I did.
So what influence did the rural and religious American South have on gender and relationship? What influence? I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church. So we were first brought to church by a neighbor who had children who were about the same age as myself and my siblings. They were homeschooled. They were deeply evangelical, including taking their neighbor kids to church. So we went to Sunday school and went to church camp, and we went to everything related to church. Our entire social life was based around church. This is the kind of church where they really looked down on women wearing pants. And the first time I ever heard about gay people, like the first time I ever heard about the concept of gay people, it was because my mom, she's like British and European. She got a haircut from a gay hairdresser. And, she thought this was very worldly of her. She's always looking to kind of find those people in the South, because she moved here from Europe. And the neighbor's mom told her, well, that is how you're going to get AIDS. You're going to get AIDS from this gay hairdresser and you're going to die. And that was the first time I'd ever heard the word gay. And so I knew that to be gay was to be diseased or to spread disease. That's what I knew. And so later on, I was in elementary school, this is the early 2000s, and the insult du jour was, you're gay. I knew that was bad. I didn't know how, but I knew it was a bad thing. And I was called gay a lot because I acted like a girl, and acting like a girl was not a good thing, especially if you were a boy. And you're taught at that age that to be a woman is bad, right? It is to be soft. It's a transgression. But at the same time, no one ever, insulted me by saying, hey, you're transgender, because that's a word I didn't even hear. That wasn't a word that people used. Maybe when I was a kid, I heard other words that were used on TV shows, but it was not the word transgender. And I had no idea what those words meant. I did not meet a transgender person until I was in college. And that's a weird thing to wrap my head around now, because it's like, okay, well, how did I think of myself before? Like, I obviously did not think of myself as transgender. I didn't really put much thought into it, which is how a lot of cis people live their lives. And, you know, I did not have the vocabulary to even begin to figure any of this out until that age, which is part of why it took so long to come out. Even after I learned about trans people, it still took many, you know, almost another decade. Yeah, about a decade before I said, oh, actually, that might be me. So, you know, when we think about the influence of living in the rural and religious South, I think the biggest influence is that there was a normalization and is a normalization of ignorance, you know, and not an ignorance of hatred, but the, you know, truly ignorance. Like, I was ignorant that being transgender was a possibility. And I care about visibility because I want to be the embodiment of that possibility for others.
Thank you both so much for sharing. What I'm hearing is visibility is very, very, very important. And I very much agree with that. Maybe especially in the rural and religious American South, where there is this culture of ignorance. And Evelyn, I think you said it really well. It's not necessarily ignorance as in hatred. It is genuine ignorance of this simply isn't discussed. People genuinely do not have this knowledge. And therefore, when they obtain it or when they hear it for the first time, sometimes it's this new scary thing, and we're taught to fear things that we don't understand. And I think being visible can only help people understand. I think conversations like this can only help people understand, or I hope anyways. Thank you for helping me raise visibility tonight. And you know, we started this conversation in joy, and then we moved into a little bit of negative territory. And somehow y'all were still able to find joy even in the negative. So like, thank you for that. I want my final question of the evening, at least, to be intentionally one of joy. And my final question is, what are you looking forward to the most in your transition?
You know, yeah, it's difficult to say, I guess. I'm excited to meet the person I'll become. I feel like I've already become a different person. I will say it's always strange. I am super early into transition. You know, I think it's really important to think or hear that that I am super early. Like I've been out publicly for less than 1 year. And that means that I'm incredibly naive about both trans issues at large, as well as trans transition stuff that I myself am going through or will go through. And I think a lot of this video that went viral a few years ago, there was like this Black father at a Pride festival, and there was a person going around interviewing people, and they put a microphone in his face and asked, hey, how many genders are there? And he said, I don't know, I just got here. And yeah, I just got here. So I'm excited to learn more about myself and also connect with more people in the trans community. That's something I'm trying to really actively do, especially meet people in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and get to know not just say the hypothetical, theoretical stuff, but also their lived experiences and the histories of trans people here in the South.
Yeah, and I think I need to say too, I came out publicly the first week of August of 2021. Evelyn and I are both COVID babies. And so there is a lot that I don't know, that I still have to learn and everything like that. I think what I'm looking forward to the most is, while I do recognize the person in the mirror and I am happier with that person than any image that I've seen before. I'm really looking forward to getting to the point where I fully embrace and love that person and try not to nitpick every little thing about her. Whether it's how much she weighs, or how much of a brow ridge she has, or I mean, if I were to list it, it would go through the end of the meeting. There are so many things that we want to pick on ourselves about, and I know that's not exclusive to the trans experience, but I think we focus on anything that we identify as not being specifically feminine in the case of a trans woman. So just either of those things being polished off, those check boxes checked on my little list of the project of managing whatever body I'm working myself into, or just learning to embrace it as it sits now. I think that level of comfort in myself is what I'm looking forward to the most.
I love both of those responses. Thank you. I am also looking forward to those things for you. I'm looking forward to seeing who y'all grow into. Amberlyn, I haven't necessarily had this experience with you, but Evelyn, like I've known you pre-transition, during your like identification as non-binary, and now through your transition as a trans woman, and I have seen you grow and I continue to watch you grow. So like I'm excited to see who you grow into. And Amberlyn, everyone deserves self-love, and like everyone deserves to feel comfortable in their skin. And so I also cannot wait for you to feel as comfortable as possible in your skin. Thank you both so much again for taking time out of your Saturday to talk about some really personal things. I really appreciate and value you both. If there are any questions from the audience, please feel free to ask now. Thank you all for joining us. Ada, I see your hand.
Yeah, no, I was just listening to what everybody had to say. A couple of things that seemed to come up a couple of times was like not knowing early on, and then as far as like education and everything, even like in the rural South and everything. How do you feel about? Do you feel like social media is really opening it up? Just if we're not necessarily super visible in the community, like, do you feel like it's kind of at least they saw a trans woman on TikTok, so they know that that person kind of exists in the universe?
I think it certainly helps. That was kind of a revelation that I had the other day, because we are, I mean, for those of you that are on this call that don't know, I mean, we faced something just this week. On Wednesday, the Greenville County Library System decided to take down all of their Pride-related displays. And that was something that we mobilized very quickly, and actually managed to get them to put them back up within about 12 hours. But there is a big push to get any kind of queer literature or anything, or any semblance of a queer person out of media, out of books, out of libraries, out of any mention of it in school, because as my friend Martha said one time, they're afraid that if they hear about a queer person, just the mention of one, that their kids are going to fart glitter. And we know that that's not true. And I do feel overwhelmed sometimes to know that we are up against this seemingly huge brick wall of people wanting to block knowledge from being out there. And then it dawned on me that the internet exists, and all of these kids have access to the internet. And there is practically nothing that these over-controlling parents, church leaders, society, and other society members are going to be able to do to pretend that the queer people, that they're, I mean, if there's a queer kid, they're a queer kid. And no amount of authoritarian control over that kid is going to change that fact. The only thing that's going to change, and the only thing that the internet, the access to the internet and that knowledge is helping us do, is give them the words to express it. Like, I know we say it all the time that we're not converting kids, and we know we're not converting kids. They think we are, but I mean, I knew at 4, having never met a trans woman until I was well into adulthood. I knew at 4, I just didn't have the words for it. So anyway, that was a little bit of a rant. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's really wonderful to be able to connect with so many trans people and queer people in general online. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff where there are a lot of people sharing their personal experiences with transition. That was something that was really helpful. I was obsessed, like, in the months leading up to deciding to take HRT, I was obsessively reading books by trans women. I was watching a million YouTube videos that was like, this is what's going to happen in the first 3 months. This is what's going to happen in the first 6 months. This is what's going to happen in the first year. This is what you can expect. I was, but I found that to all to be pretty helpful, honestly, because it kind of set a path of, and also made me feel very comfortable. They said, okay, other people have done this before. They're fine. It worked out. Let's do it. I also really think it's cool that there's a lot of particularly trans people who are dedicated to doing like education. So there's some really cool transgender, some of them are like scholars. So recently I've been following the work of like Jill Peterson, who's like coming off a book that's all about trans youth and that history. Susan Stryker, who wrote a transgender history. There's also just interesting creators online. One of them, oh gosh, her name is Morgan something, and she's been so cool to see, because she, really breaks down a lot of these. Maybe it wasn't Morgan, whatever her name is. Erin, yeah, it's called Erin in the Morn. That's what I call it this morning. Yeah, Erin Reed is her name. She's on Twitter and TikTok and all the other sites, and she really does a good job of like breaking down all of the legislation that's happening, every single issue in a really good educational way, and also transgender history about different trans people and trans movements throughout history. I've found that all to be incredibly helpful, because, it's a reminder that there's a way larger community way beyond. I also think it's helpful to get a perspective on things. I think that I maybe would have had a less healthy relationship to my own transition had I not been able to see people talking and discussing these issues online and reading lots and lots of books about it.
I think that was a great question, Ada. Thank you so much for raising that. I do think the internet can be a really valuable tool, like Evelyn and Amberlyn have both spoken to. Yeah,
I don't think it holds the same society shifting power that raw visibility does, but definitely access to that knowledge. Yeah, I think the internet is is a game changer that makes a lot of the book banning, book burning bullcrap that we've had to deal with the past few years. It sucks, but it makes it a much more moot issue than it ever has been in the past.
I think that's a really good point. Are there any other questions from the audience before we close out? I wanted to uplift something that Catherine threw into the chat. She said, no questions, just thankful for being able to listen and learn. So thank you, Catherine, for sharing that. I think learning and listening, they're always important, especially, I know Kat personally, and I know that she is a cis woman, so I know that she exists outside of this identity that we're discussing tonight. I think listening to people's experiences, especially when they're different from your own, is really important for understanding people in general and the world in general. So thank you, Kat, for uplifting that. Anything else before we close out for the evening?
I just wanted to say thanks for holding space for this kind of conversation, because too often are the people who are actually, us, are, queer, trans, non-binary, going through these things, are we able to express, our experiences without being, pushed aside? Because there's so much out there and there's so many people shouting, and this kind of puts, us up on, on top of the mountain in our own little room where we can share these things.
Thank you, Corey, for putting this together. And I really enjoyed hearing about your experience, Amberlyn.
Thank you both for helping me put this together. It wouldn't have happened without the two of y'all. When I set out to discuss sexuality, actually it was my first goal in the rural and religious American South, and then the people that I ended up reaching out to both ended up being queer trans women, and so that I didn't intend to make a panel of trans women, but I'm awfully glad I did. So thank you. This was a wonderful conversation, and just thank you everyone for showing up tonight. I know it's a Saturday evening. Y'all probably got so many not better things to do, but there are so many things to do on a Saturday evening, so it means a lot to, I think, all of us that you made the time to come out and chose us to spend your time with. So thank you very, very much. Thank you both for sharing your stories. Thank you everyone for your strong questions and moments of uplifting joy. So just thank you all around to everyone. Catch us next time. The next Lighthouse event is, well, Beck's already left the conversation, but I believe the next Lighthouse event is an episode of the Fire Pit that Bex and I host. It's a podcast. We're going to be talking about adultery, so it's a little bit less social justice-y and more just a little bit socially taboo, maybe socially charged topic. So stay tuned for that. It'll be posted on YouTube and on our Facebook page. Thanks, friends.
Thanks,
Bye.
Corey. Thank you, Evelyn. Everybody else. Thank you.
Thank y'all. Bye. Have a good night.
Good night.